It was a conversation I had with a number of the traders when I first came in on those first few weeks. Exactly the same spiel as I gave the F1 drivers, which is, I get this. You live in a world where bravado is king, and you need to present that you're confident and you're calm and you're collected. You and I have spoken previously about that old duck analogy, floating along the surface, looking like you're taking it all within your stride, but the feet are going furiously underneath the water.
Hi again, welcome to another episode of World of Oil Derivatives. I'm Greg Newman, Group Chief Executive of Onyx Capital Group, and today is another episode in our leadership series. I'm joined with Chris Gooder, who is our Performance Director at Onyx, joined recently in a very interesting role, and I think a slightly different podcast, a lot to dig into, and yeah, we'll get straight into it. So Chris, thanks for joining, of course. Been here a few months now, right, settled in. I think it's probably worth for the audience me giving a bit of context to this. Performance psychology has got many different forms. I think people will know it mainly in sport, made popular in a few different areas, international, like rugby, football, but it's everywhere clearly. And you're from F1, you could talk a bit about that. But I think for us, we have an established trading floor. We've been going for 8 years, but really when you are performing at a high level and you've got a lot of personalities, a lot of high performers, having them in the right mindset and having them kind of targeted and at least supported is a huge edge, I would say. And certainly I would say, general traders, the general trading mindset is a bit more ego orientated, maybe a bit more like, well, I can do this. Who the hell are you type thing? But I think we've learned over time that absolutely not. It's just like a sport. There's a lot going on that you can kind of calibrate with a professional, and we've decided, we need to invest in this area. We've kind of dipped our toe in it before, but we're really quite serious about it now. So it's been great to have you on board. You've been here, 3-4 months?
Just over 3 months, yeah.
Cool. So I guess that's the first thing. I mean, completely new to trading, no real experience, not personal accounts, nothing.
Not at all.
So perceptions of trading, I guess, and why you're interested in the role.
I think when you and I first spoke in relation to me coming in, it became clear, from my perspective at least, that you took this stuff really seriously. And whilst it's not the be all and end all, I think it's a fairly fundamental thing in itself, understanding your own mind, understanding your behaviours, realising the impact that has on performance more often than not under pressure, but also the way it ties into everything else. So you look at the trade floor and we call it a team sheet, don't we? We've got the sort of the entire floor on a sheet of paper, separated out by desks, and it's no different to having a squad, an elite level squad in football. We've got these young graduates that are coming in and are super talented and really eager with loads of potential, but they've got a load of learning and development to do. There's a huge psychological element to that, right? How do we support them best? How do we keep them challenged to the point that they're motivated and interested? Then we have that middle band of sort of junior traders going into traders who are responsible for training and developing our youngsters, but also have got their eyes on senior positions and are starting to get more touches on the ball and playing around with a bit more risk. And then we sort of look at some of the more traditional work around performance under pressure and decision making and problem solving. And then you've got your desk heads who are the senior guys in the dressing room who have been around for a few years and deal with a lot of pressure on a day-by-day basis. Maybe slightly bigger egos that we're playing with. And it's important to note on that, actually, that ego sometimes gets marked as a bit of a dirty word. In my world, it's just not. It's how you view and you see yourself, and wrapped into that is belief and confidence, and of course that stuff that we need to foster.
It's funny, as you talk and as I've seen it work out, I mean, you are full-time. This is a full-time investment. You are here day in, day out. You didn't actually even say much in the first couple of months, as you just needed to learn, digest what's going on. I would say as well, it's almost a productivity thing as well. Like, we call it performance, but what is performance? Is performing at your highest level, which is kind of a productivity thing. And that, all the debates going around, everything from work from home for hours and, what is work-life balance these days? This is like a really interesting way of looking at it, because we're taking the view, or at least I'm taking the view, we're not here to be, run of the mill. We're here to be the best we could possibly be, the best in the world at what we do. So it's not about working people to death at all. It's about getting the best out of people in the most efficient way. But I'm so aware that, every action has a reaction, and psychology within a team and the knock-on effects culturally and, what people say to each other, how they feel. It's almost like an ecosystem. Like there's so much going on. So on the one hand, I feel like it is about optimizing productivity. But on the other hand, it's maybe also about getting people to where they didn't know that they could be themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And what it's coming down to, and I think the thing that appealed to me most about this world is that it's probably the closest thing in a business sense you're going to find to elite level sport.
Yeah.
So because of the pressure that's placed upon this team on a day-by-day basis, it's perhaps most closely linked to a Formula One driver who's, competing every weekend or every other weekend. Point number one. But secondly, and I think this is the key thing that we're talking around here, is that so many businesses will bring in an elite performance psychologist who has a background in sport to do a keynote at the end of the year when there's a pot of L&D money that needs spending.
We've had plenty of those.
And I think you and I have discussed previously, whilst you may get a few people in the room who find it mildly interesting and may do something about it, the vast majority will go back to their desks and within 5 minutes will return to business as usual. This stuff is born from small day-to-day behaviours and the impact that has, both in the sense of the sort of personal work that we do one-on-one with everybody in the building, the teamwork that we do. So if we separate those desks out, sort of little mini performance teams, exactly as you're alluding to, the comment from the desk head to the junior trader that impacts their day, that then impacts the ability for them to develop their trader analyst. It's all psychology, isn't it? It's all behavioral stuff. And I think being embedded within the environment and having a degree of influence over that on a day-by-day basis, that's where you start to see positive impact and change here.
So what is the big beliefs? I mean, if we start with what I think, and I'm sure absolutely happy for you to tear it down, it's, you have to, if you're going into a new area or, day one type mentality, for me, it's what is the communication like? Is the team, how is the kind of orders, if you like, or like the decisions passing down and how people are responding to them? That one's a massive one for me. I've always said, if you're trying to lead an army, let's say, and you're like, go left, and they just go no and go right, then no one's in charge. It's not cohesive. So it's the unity concept. And we've kind of half joked about really what you want is almost like cult, like culture, like an actual cult, like everyone believing in this mission together and knowing that whatever they do, it's a part of this overall thing and it's bigger than everyone. That is a huge challenge to achieve. And there's so many factors there. That's kind of my number one priority. You might look at it completely differently. I don't know. And then I guess if you can nail that, then you're looking at the individuals and making sure that they're primed and they're happy, essentially. But am I oversimplifying it? Or?
No, not at all. I think my work a lot of the time is to say, well, the idea of whoever's in charge saying we're going left and everyone following the left is the byproduct. That's the end result that we're really after.
Okay.
What I'm then trying to do is figure out how to get people on board so that happens. And this is where we come down a little bit more to the nature of, okay, what are the binding factors? Of course, there are individual differences.
Yeah.
And we have to understand, we have to heighten levels of people's awareness and self-awareness that allows them to understand their emotions and regulate their emotions a bit better. But when you and I first got up and we said, right, what are the generic rules here? The 3 words we scribbled down on a bit of paper were purpose, belonging, and safety. Sometimes we can remove the word safety and put trust in place. In really simple terms, the sense of purpose, i.e., what are we aiming for here as a collective, as a group? What's the joint thing beyond our own personal agendas or interests that pulls us together?
And out of interest, when you've been out of the places, or do people fall down on that straight away sometimes? You come in and say, where is the purpose? Like, what have we been doing here?
Sure, mixed. I think some of the pushback that you get is that, and I think it's completely legitimate, is that can we have individual purpose, i.e. what do I stand for as a person, and what's the thing that gets me into work motivated on a freezing cold February morning, motivated, versus what's the group purpose. And sometimes they don't necessarily need to align perfectly. I think in an ideal world, they do.
But you'll assess that first off yourself and say, like, what am I getting that the purpose is here from the corporation point of view and the individual point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're somebody that's managing a group of people and you can foster a sense of group purpose, and that group buys into that, and then that's something that we can have as a bit of a North Star. So when things get a little bit tricky or we're up against it or we're losing money or we're having a tough couple of months, we can go back to that and say, this is what we're going after. This is what we're using as a motivating factor. That has to be key. That has to be important. What I tend to take care of is some of the more individual purpose drives. They can be different across the board. Some people want to do it as a challenge, something new, something interesting, and they like to motivate themselves in that way. Some people are going to be entirely money motivated, and that's absolutely fine as well. There's a myriad of reasons from a personal purpose perspective, but what I'm really interested in is the point that you've just made. What's the group purpose, and do we have buy-in? Second is that point around belonging. This is, watch any sports documentary on any successful team sport. They've fostered a sense of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. And you and I have spoken about how we bring that to life practically. A lot of the time it comes down to rituals or things that have always happened, that idea that we're coming into a system and we hope to better it and then we might move on. But we're just passing through. Again, this is a notion that's used in sport all of the time. You inherit,
All Blacks, you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. You inherit the jersey for a short amount of time, and your job is to move it on, move the organisation on.
So then surely that is the role of a leader. If you're a prime minister or whatever it is, business leader, sport leader, you have to set a purpose that people can believe in. Because they might not even necessarily have thought about it themselves, but they go, I actually wouldn't mind.
And that's the North Star, isn't it? That's that thing that we can aim towards and drive towards, especially when times are tough. It's really easy to sail the ship on calm waters. It's when it starts to get a bit choppy, we need that focal point in place.
And generally speaking, that has to be bigger than money. That has to be bigger than personal goals, surely.
Yeah, it has to be a stretch. It has to be something that motivates and excites people.
But in your experiences, it can't be. It has to have some element of altruism in it, I guess, or what are the rules?
And I think that ties into both the point that we've discussed, that joint purpose, but also that sense of belonging. Has to be, I'm contributing to something bigger than me, and I feel part of something. I think if both of those things are in place, then absolutely it goes beyond binary targets, be they sort of financial or otherwise. The problem with those, of course, is that when you hit them, then what next?
Well, this is why I'll get a bit more raw on this, right? I mean, when we started, ultimately, you just want a job in trading because you want to get rich, obviously, that's no secret. But you also, a great thing about trading is you can start at 22, a bit like sport, and be a superstar, right? That's rare, you know. And so these people who are ambitious and want to be results driven now, not 20, 30 years, like accountant becoming a CFO, that's one route. But this is the fast, I want to be a star now. It's interesting that, as luck would have it, strategic positioning, all the rest of it, in our little kind of microcosm, we probably outperformed what we expected to do. And to a degree, it was like, well, what now? And then I always felt like at my previous place, there was no real, there was no now. I said, I'm actually bored now. I remember being screamed at. It's like, well, on my job, I don't want to be here and make you rich. That's not that fun, right? I mean, we've done this great thing. We've got going from 0 to 1. But how do we get excited about the next thing? And once you've got a level of, and crassly, everyone's different, but you have a number in your head about what money you want in your account. And that's one thing. But when you actually see money hit your account, you see some of the traders, they completely change because they've got that kind of fear in them that when they're trading that, I might have an open position, but if I don't actually monetize it and close it out, it's not real. That's embedded in a trader. So you extrapolate it to your personal life and go, well, that 100 grand or whatever it is, hypothetical, but it's in your account. You're like, wow, it's crystallized. And then I've noticed all the grads that come into junior to mid to senior trader, their personality evolution is quite similar in that sense. Their maturity kind of comes with it. They stop being so anxious, stop needing to prove themselves so much, and then they evolve into this, okay, so why should I care? And some people, like you said, the third one we haven't got to yet, which is safety and trust, that can be a negative for me as well, because they're too comfortable. I've got a great life. But how are we pursuing something that can bring a new purpose, a new belonging, and that's scalable for everyone else, it's inspiring for everyone else? So there's all these challenges, I guess, is what I'm getting at. But to speak candidly, it's been a real issue because, the saying of having fuck you money or whatever, or having achieved to some degree what you wanted to achieve. So how do you get people like that to train the next generation, to inspire the next generation about something bigger than themselves?
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, that purpose that we're talking around here is something that inspires people and they get on board with, and they realize that they can't do on their own. But actually, in reality, that very last point still applies, which is, so let's go back to sport for a moment to make a sort of direct comparison. Team sport's an easy comparison, right? 'Cause you literally cannot do it on your own. But even sports that are individual, a Formula One driver is a really good example. There's only so much that they can do by following their own agendas and interests. Now, they can further those agendas and interests. They can increase the chances of good things happening, but they need to bring people along with them. And this is where we start to talk about levels. So, that magic number that you were speaking around, that might be wholly achievable on your own. But if we're going to use anything as a motivating factor, but let's take money in this case, and we want to go to the next level or the next level, we're going to need people around us to help support and put that in place. This is the sort of work that I'm trying to foster here. And this is why sport is for me an ideal training ground to come in here and hopefully do some good things, because make no bones about it, whilst there is a joint purpose around what that squad is trying to achieve, you have got a myriad of individual interests within that changing room.
But I sense it from the younger guys especially. They say, if you're in this industry and you're in finance, your temptation is to say it's all about money. I haven't seen that. I've seen people make really interesting decisions that definitely aren't about money, because you kind of look at, if you'd gone that way or whatever, there's also an element of risk to it. So I guess that's the safety of it. But I'm thinking of one particular conversation I even had recently, which is like, but why are you doing this? Like, genuinely, if you don't need the money or whatever, why are you doing it? And it's actually a really tough question, because you might say, no, I'm telling you, I want to change the world. I think we're in a position where we can, democratize oil markets. I actually almost see them thinking, yeah. It's hard to convince someone that you really believe it, other than communicating it as best you can. But I think what they want to hear, and particularly traders, they're naturally cynics. It's kind of their job to be a cynic, right? So they're saying, no, I want to know the actual reasons. So what they're actually looking for, which is not necessarily actually a bad thing. And that's where our transparency, I think, culture comes in, is like, even if you say, well, I'm just an insecure guy who really wants to prove myself, a trader would actually like to hear that, because, okay, it makes sense now. Do you know what I mean?
But I think that's a thread that links a number of successful people. I don't know your view on this.
No, I get it, but that's what I'm saying. But you want them to believe it's a double-edged sword, because I want them to say, look, at the end of the day, I don't know what gets me up in the morning really and drives. Is it insecurities? Is it this? Is it that? But I'm telling you, what I tell myself at least is that I am very interested in this journey. It feels like a good way to spend my life. And I think you guys should find it interesting too, and you can be a part of this. And I just thought I'd mention that, because again, listeners, they're used to these kind of keynote speakers was find your passion and all that. It's all real talk, but bringing it to reality, I think you have to mold in the kind of, if you like, awkward part of that as well, which is like, let's address what really drives us sometimes is, resentment, it's anger, and it's all that. And that's actually okay if you can harness it into something.
And this is where we're starting to speak about individual purposes versus group purposes. Those individual purposes behind closed doors could be absolutely anything. And as long as they motivate, and as long as they drive, and as long as they enhance performance, we can run with anything. Like I said, I think there's a thread that runs between a number of super successful people, at least in my experience, is that insecurity and is that drive to prove themselves or others wrong. And that's great. We can foster that.
Harness that.
Yeah, absolutely. We can harness that and we can use that.
Well, I've actually said it's also the fight, right? If you really enjoy the battle, the fight, I think Steve Jobs was very much like that. That can be a fire. And I've actually noticed when it's not there, when there's not fire, success is a killer. Success is like lethargy, and you're going, okay, well, you need the failure, you need the hunger. And I think even we've had our own recent tough times, and it's like, you see the galvanization of people. It's way more enjoyable because it's actually seeing proper character.
What's really interesting when you look at the science around dopamine. Dopamine is banded around as a sort of chemical that most people think they understand, but they often mark it as sort of the reward chemical. It's the thing that you get when things go your way. And the science tells us actually a little bit different. It's the chemical of uncertainty. It's the chemical of motivation. So it's the flush that you get when you're entering into something and you don't know how it's going to go. This is why casinos make loads of money.
Right.
If people won all of the time, no one would really go to casinos because yes, they'd make a little bit, but they wouldn't have that same rush. They wouldn't have that same feeling. It's the anticipation that's really, really engaging. So linking that to your point around challenge, that's what's motivating people.
Venturing into the unknown.
Venturing into the unknown, that unknown quantity around is this going to go our way or is it not going to go our way? That's the chemical rush that we're getting. That's what
awesome.
keeps people engaged.
Okay.
And it's the conversation I've had with so many athletes over so many years, which is you think you want to win every week. You don't, because you'd enjoy it for a month, 6 weeks, and then you become bored.
Well, that's one way of saying it, but I think, as you said, it's the new frontier. And I guess it's getting really deep now, but it's in like, what are we here to do? I don't know. But ultimately, I think a consistent thing among us as humans is we want to push the next level. We are pushing boundaries all the time. It's just what we do. So it's evolution, it's increasing efficiency. So in a way, you can just be like, if you accept that, you can almost reverse it and not be that deep. Be like, look, obviously, we're going to keep pushing this.
Sure.
Like, because that is what we do. And if we think we can see a gap in the market in this instance, or we can see a pathway to efficiency that we want to be a part of, which we think there's a greater good or whatever, that seems like that's where it's at. And actually now, if I extrapolate back to my kind of past with people I've worked with, I feel let down on that front, because it's like, guys, look, we're doing great. Let's just have a nice, easy life. I'm like, what the hell? Like, that is not who I am, or at least that doesn't seem like a business mantra. So I think that's kind of a rule for me that I'm glad, like, you've put really well, is like, I guess you can't be reckless about it, but you need to set always the new frontier and get people excited about it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think one caveat to that, and you and I have discussed this previously as well, is that there are varying degrees to which people are motivated by that. This is really where it comes down to individual differences. And I think
it's still the job, because if you find like a random purpose that no one can relate with, then that's the same as having the wrong purpose.
Sure,
right? So
sure. But I think to achieve that purpose, you need a range of characters within your army. So in a leadership sense, there are going to be optimists in this building who are wildly enthused by changing the world and taking things to new levels and exploring new frontiers. But within that, you're going to need certain personality types who are perhaps more prudent in their
more
thinking,
rocks
and solid, and actually don't necessarily get as motivated by the purpose or the vision, but play an important role in achieving it.
But so that's like, I really resonate with that. But it's also, it's a bit like, it's a bit random, but it's a bit like a partner of someone. Like, you know, you have a really quiet introvert matched with an extrovert, and it works.
Yeah.
So as much as you say, look, the rock in this scenario is not motivated, but there must be, but they still want to be here and be that rock for that mission. So I don't actually, how do you make sense of that?
Again, it's a joint value, isn't it? It's a joint purpose that everyone's striving after.
Yeah.
We psychometrically measure everyone on the trade floor. And naively coming in, I thought, well, we're going to start to see a number of certain personality preferences that link what an elite level trader is. And actually, you don't necessarily. You see quite a range. You see quite a mix. And they all play a role. They all play a function. Don't get me wrong, there's a sweet spot with every personality type where we can play to those strengths. But every personality type also has a weakness associated with it. And my role is to try and sort of blend that and link that together, especially in a leadership sense when we're dealing with people who do the day-to-day management. Let's understand these people. Let's understand their role in the joint mission that we're going after here. That's really how we start to piece this performance psychology bit under pressure on a day-by-day basis.
But as long as you meet the criteria of competence and, I guess, some level of baseline motivation, you want to be as diverse as possible, it sounds like, because they're going to help you challenge in the right way and push in other ways. So you got, you know, you probably, and again, I'm just being arbitrarily pulling it out my arse, but I would say you probably want 1 out of 10 really pushing, because if all 10 are pushing, it's a nightmare, right? And but at the same time, you know, you need someone to be going, but why can't we do this differently? And I'm going to go ahead. But then you need so many people who are your, as you say, rocks, but like, I'm thinking of like all the different personalities on the trading floor. Like a really like undervalued guy for us is like Jasper. Like, he's just always been that guy who will like 8 years or at least 7 years, clock in, clock out, high performance, just again and again and again. It's like a really elite level soldier, like absolutely need that guy. But he's very happy to get involved in quite creative things, and he has his ideas. But, you know, without people like that, you definitely wouldn't get anywhere. And I could just think of so many scenarios like that. But the flip side, I would say, is you can go too far with that maybe and have too few people pushing. So then it's like only one person everyone else is just following blindly. There's probably challenges with that as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So consider it in these terms. If we say there's a spectrum that people fall on, and at one end of the spectrum is task, which is people that are outcome orientated and very competitive and results driven. And at the other end of the spectrum is people. And the guys that fall at this end of the spectrum are way more concerned by their emotions, other people's emotions, the interaction between the two. Evidently, on that trade floor, we have a myriad of people that fall on different parts of that spectrum. But on a day-by-day basis, you've got your task-orientated person who's got eyes on the prize and is driving things and is relentless in that drive and wants to push the P&L as high as possible. You've got the people-orientated person at the other end of the spectrum who's keeping their eyes on the desk and realizing that person's been quiet for a few days. Now, it's all within the same interest, right? The goal is still the same. But the person that is, we would call them a strong red, someone that's very forceful, very competitive, has got their eyes on the screen and is doing their job and driving things along, but they're not noticing what's going on behind them a lot of the time. Now, that person at the people end of the spectrum doesn't mean they're not going to contribute to P&L in a financial sense. Of course they are. But they're also perhaps a little bit more emotionally astute and realizing the dynamic on the desk and sort of retracing their steps and trying to figure out where that might have come from. This is all performance enhancing stuff from two wildly different personality types. And both are equally as important in my book.
Cool. So why don't we just, for my interest as well, like we go back to your F1 days. So you left university and you studied psychology. And what was your first job?
I went straight into coaching, football coaching. So I got a job with Arsenal on their graduate scheme type thing. And I come from a football mad family, played a little bit when I was younger. And for me, it became instantly clear. I actually was in Singapore. I did a stint in Singapore, first year out of university coaching. And I thought there's a marriage here of the two things that I am interested in. So the sports side of things, I always thought I would end up in, but psychology and people have always been the interest. And like I said, it was a new emerging discipline at that time, and it looked like something that was going to take off.
And was there like a mentor you had there, or?
Yeah, there's one lady in particular who gave me my very first job in psychology. Even when I'm sat out there at my desk, I have her words sort of ringing in my ears, and she's that person in life that I think a lot of us have had sort of coming up.
Definitely.
That reminded you that you were better than you thought you were when you needed that message, and then also told you that you weren't as good as you thought you were when you needed that message. So she's that person for me. Wildly experienced, been to 101 Olympic Games, and more than anything, just reassured and said, you understand this and you're really good at this. Back yourself and trust yourself a little bit more. Which, even when it comes to working with high performers, I think that's a really key message, because so many people that work in elite level environments struggle with the same challenges everyone else does. Imposter syndrome, whatever. And the way, it was a conversation I had with a number of the traders when I first came in on those first few weeks, exactly the same spiel as I gave the F1 drivers, which is, I get this. You live in a world where bravado is king, and you need to present that you're confident and you're calm and you're collected. You and I have spoken previously about that old duck analogy, floating along the surface, looking like you're taking it all within your stride, but the feet are going furiously underneath the water. What I try and provide here is just that safe space behind a closed door, behind the curtain we call it, where you can just speak a little bit more openly with what you're struggling with.
So that was the case in Arsenal, right? And you found players were receptive to that, and you saw that they saw the benefit, or?
Irrelevant of the environment. International football, Formula One, definitely. I've had a stab at most sports over the years. And
what led you to F1?
Complete chance, as is the case in most sport. You get a job with one driver, you do a good job, and then all of a sudden there's interest elsewhere. And then before you know it, you're 8 seasons in and dealing with a number of drivers on the grid every year. The reason for F1 for me personally was it's proper performance psychology, proper performance under pressure. Again, not too dissimilar to what goes on here. Tiny mistakes, fairly catastrophic consequences. Brilliant breeding ground, really, really good chance for me to test the theory. But also you need to prove worth. It's a ruthless world. So unless you can prove worth and make things super practical and tangible, and the person you're working with can see the benefit of the work that you're doing, you won't last for very long. it's really similar to here. You need to demonstrate that you can impact positive change quite quickly. So yeah, it was the perfect place for me to spend my time, really.
So if we could talk about what then makes a great performer, away from the obvious competencies that are similar across the board. Like as you're talking there, it's, I get the impression of an F1 driver being, very steely minded, right? Ultimately just doing the repetitions and unbelievable focus, but also taking care of their whole life around this job. It feels like there's no other way to do it. But I don't know if that's just for example, people have challenged me lately on like, what is the optimum work-life balance? And I just think it's a bit of a misnomer, because I'm like, if you want to be the best at something, like there's a lot of people in the world who want to be the best as well. So how are you going to differentiate? You need to be all in, but I don't know if that's a fair thing to say.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because there used to be a separation between wellness and well-being and performance. I've never bought into that, and thankfully over the years, up to the current day, they've now amalgamated into one of the same thing. Unless you are looking after yourself, performance levels are going to be impacted.
Yeah.
We are, as humans, designed to expend and renew energy. It's as simple as that. We fall into habits where we're really good at expending energy and quite terrible at renewing energy. And then we wonder why performance levels drop, especially in an environment like this where it's cognitively very, very demanding. It's the same in Formula One. Again, quite a neat crossover. But the cognitive load that these guys are dealing with on a day-by-day basis, the problem solving under pressure, the communication that is clearly important, but quite strained, when you're up against it. All of these things are impacted positively by sleep, by being,
the classics.
Being physically healthy, by reconnecting with people and things outside of this building.
Yeah.
They're one of the same thing. This isn't just a mental skill set that we're providing traders with behind closed doors when they're in the building. This is a holistic view of what nick you walk into the building in.
You've got a kind of checklist, do you, like in terms of like, so if I was to say, obviously physical health, where they're at, how are they dealing with stress, baseline, I guess, heart rate variability, if you want to get quantifiable about it. But also, I guess, in a way, something more than that, like, have they got a life outside work? Is that working for them? Is it working against them? I guess that's quite important, right?
Absolutely. So there's no hard line between people's personal life and their performance life. We see this in sport. I think people work on the basis that these guys are machines and they can cross the line and turn into a mentality monster. In my experience, that's never been the case. And actually, a lot of the work that we do is taking care of or supporting people with things that are going on away from their performance environment, because there is an impact. You don't change your mind. It's not a case of taking the home mind out and putting the work mind in. It's the very same thing. It impacts sleep. It impacts personal relationships. It impacts stress levels, cortisol levels.
So again, that makes me think of belonging again as like the second principle, because, sometimes, and I've had it thousands of times, life outside work is actually a bit like frustrating, because people don't play by the same rules. There's no structure. There's no, just annoying stuff. People talking about insecurities, trying to one up you at dinner parties, or like your parents talking shit or whatever it is. You just like, I just want to go back to work and just do this thing that makes me happy. And actually and there's a purpose and there's structure. That's where I sit, and it gives me belonging. But I guess it's easy to say that in my position, but hopefully that's what we should be trying to do, right? This is a place for you to actually feel right.
I completely agree. And whilst I've said that we try and, from a personal perspective, support people as much as we possibly can, because we realise the impact in a professional sense, there are plenty of examples that I've had in my career where actually work has been the safe space.
Yes.
So, you look forward to going to work of a morning because that's where you feel like you do belong.
And you're valued, right?
Yeah, you're valued, you feel part of something, you're motivated, you're driven. Now, it's often born from quite a negative place, in as much as things aren't going brilliantly well behind the scenes, which is why you look for that escape. Ideally, we level both out, right? We do what we can to get people in as good a shape as they can, both sides of the line. But yeah, absolutely. We've worked with a number of athletes who cannot wait to a Saturday afternoon. That's where they feel the most free.
Well, I'd wish that for everyone, because it's a bit of a taboo to say, use the word work even, but it's in like, if you change it and think, this is what you do, this is your vocation, this is your teammates around you, every guy in the military, every guy I spoke to, or guy, girl in the sport, even like my own days when I was playing sport back in the day, you're like, I miss those days so much. Why do I miss them? Not because, okay, yeah, great to go out on the pitch and do your thing.
Yeah.
But really you miss the people and the journey you had with them. And why should you not have that at work?
In my experience, the more pressurized the environment, the tighter the group comes together as well. There's a defense mechanism in there, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's almost like a primal switch that says, well, I'm not going to survive here alone, so I need to be part of something. Yeah. What that fosters is unbelievably tight groups, groups of people who have been through things together, and that's the unifying factor.
But that's the weird thing for me, because again, like, I think people always accuse you, or us, like, even in this conversation, it's wishy-washy. People love to say that about psychology, about performance, and it's poor, because it's like everything is psychology. But ultimately, how we're actually achieving this, if I was being really ruthless about it, I would say, well, you absolutely have to have failure. You have to almost force it. So if I'm thinking about having a child and raising a child, if everything is spoiling them and love and all that, they're not going to develop as people, but actually also, they're probably not going to enjoy it that much. I mean, as you said, you need the lows to have the highs. And so you want to shake kind of, or at least challenge the entire culture at times to bring people together, ironically. I don't know the formula, but I guess, again, like, what I'm trying to get at here is like, this day and age, and particularly in the UK and social media and all that, there's a lot of like ideas about how work should be from the majority, because the majority of people aren't in leadership positions, and what they want from work is obviously work as little as much and gets paid as much in theory. But actually, I challenge that. I think people who get really pushed, they love being pushed, really, as long as it's in a safe environment and as long as there's reward and all that. And actually, that's the thing that they'll remember the most. And I kind of want that for people, but it can make you seem like you're the bad person, right? Because it's like you're putting that, remember you said, I'm high challenge, Omar's high support. And then it's like, that's a nice mix.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was just about to say, because it's one of the first conversations, again, you and I had. It's one of the first things we scribbled on a bit of paper, and you're going to be sick to the back teeth of me throwing those words at you. But it has to be high challenge, high support. Yeah. The resilience literature is all about that. On a day-by-day basis, do people feel like there is enough of a challenge to motivate them and excite them, but supported enough to know that if it goes horribly wrong, and this takes us back to that safety point, from a psychological perspective, if it goes horribly wrong, what are the behaviours that are demonstrated towards them? Fear is the killer in all of this.
Yes, yeah.
So if people are fearful of the consequences of getting it wrong, performance levels will be wildly negatively impacted, which comes back to that idea of support. The further point, and this is why being in the building on a day-by-day basis makes such a difference, I think it's a really fair challenge to say a lot of this stuff can sound quite airy-fairy and wishy-washy. It's my philosophy, my practice philosophy is to try and get away from that and translate this stuff into behaviours and communication and messaging that brings it to life.
And truth, right?
And truth. And again, a lot of the work that we do with the traders is about drawing up the realities of this world. You mentioned kids growing up in those formative years where they're programming these belief systems that are kind of going to run the show for the next 40, 50, 60 years. Yeah. If we can get some beliefs that are grounded in reality, sometimes unpopular realities, then people stand half a chance, because then when they experience those things and dip into the belief systems and say, right, what do we think about this? What do we believe here? And the message that comes back is something that's grounded in reality, popular or unpopular, emotionally we'll probably be okay with that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny when you say the fear of something, and I think it's all about justifying what those fears should be, because there's always going to be fears. But to me, it's like, if you fail, not going to be a problem. Like, but we need to make that clear. Like, what are the things that we're going to be like, look, if it happens, we're together, we're bonded, whatever. But I do want people to fear not trying, not giving a shit, like moaning, like having a sense of like not being part of the team, not pulling their weight or not speaking or whatever it is. And I think maybe I'm trying to think of the things that we now need to do and how do we define that. It's, at least from a leadership perspective, it's getting super clear on that. And it's all well and good communicating, this is what we want, this is what we don't want. But we humans, again, we're going to respond to actions, not words.
Yeah, so absolutely. And they're the things that reinforce either positively or negatively. Yeah. We often call them sort of performance principles. So you have your purpose at the top, and then you say, right, as a team, what do we do when we're at our best?
Yeah.
And those sort of form your principles that we live by. They're your non-negotiables. They're those day-to-day behaviors, those conversations, those processes and systems that are absolutely non-negotiable. They exist, by the way. I don't think we have to go looking for them. I think we just need to bring them to the surface and document them. But they're absolutely key. I don't think they need to be something that's wrapped in fear. I think they just need to be the norm. They need to be the thing that everybody does, and we positively reinforce when we
But let's
see
again,
them.
being candid though, you can get fired. I mean, ultimately at a workplace. So there's going to be something. If I'm afraid of losing my job, but what is going to make me lose my job?
Yep.
Those things need to be not, absurd things. They need to be like, laziness or dropping the ball in some specific way, behavioral basically.
Sure.
But they shouldn't be necessarily outcome focused, which doesn't sound right. But I would really back that. If a trader's going to lose money, you're going to lose money. That is the job, right? It's how you lost the money, and you can lose well in this game. Did you manage the position well? Did you, if you had a stop loss, did you honor it? And, someone who loses a few million a year, you can absolutely keep around as long as there is a plan, they're sticking to it, because there's so many factors at play. But the flip side, if someone's just going to be evidently rolling the dice, and this is specific to trading, obviously, and they've been told, I want to see more methodology, I want to see the justification, and they're repeatedly not doing, then they should be scared of doing that, because you will get fired for doing that. And I know I'm just challenging the...
No, absolutely. But we have, here, we have a monthly check-in, right? There is things that, especially junior traders working their way up the ranks, are held accountable to on a month-by-month basis. My job in that room is to almost police that idea that the failing is fine, but the repeated failure in terms of not failing fast enough or learning lessons quickly
or not feeling
enough.
Like you need to learn lessons,
Sure,
which is why humility is massive for us.
Absolutely. So that idea of the values and what we stand for and the behaviors that we know work in this environment, if they're not being adhered to, that's a slightly separate conversation. That's nothing really to do with failure. That's just not getting on board with those principles that we're speaking about.
Be honest, because we can always edit this out. But resilience, humility, accountability is something that I bang on about because it's simple, it's easy, but also I can justify where those came from. Like legitimately, no one's going to say, or I don't think anyone can say they're wishy-washy. Like we've got evidence that they work, it's the principles we live by, and we've got scenarios to like look back on. But being brutal about it, what were the gaps in Onyx though? And did you believe in that, or do you see that in everyone else? Or is the company growing so fast that there's actually that risk that not everyone has that DNA?
Well, of course there is. And we talk about Onyx DNA, don't we? We talk about senior traders or desk heads that have been in the building for 3 or 4 or 5 years and have Onyx DNA. So those values are sort of ingrained within them. They use them on a day-by-day basis. Why? Because they've heard those words most days. And going back to that point,
so you don't think there's because I remember that you said that, like you have the company or leadership will have, this is our principles, this is what we stand for. Then you go and ask other people and you see if they line up, and a lot of the time they don't. But we didn't have that problem here, I hope. Or
well, it's something that we need to keep an eye on because things are expanding quite rapidly. It's easiest
at least on the resilience, humility, accountability. Like everyone can say that, I hope.
Yes, absolutely, because we keep coming back to them. It takes a bit longer when it's most easily policed, right? When you've got a small group of people. When things get a bit bigger, or especially, and I think this is where it becomes slightly trickier, when more senior hires come in with their own way of doing things and perhaps their own set of values and their own performance philosophies, that can be tricky. And that's a harder thing to police. I think when young graduates come in and they're eager to impress and they really want to get on board and feel part of something, going back to that point around belonging, those principles are quite easily put in place and they'll jump on board with them. No
I'm
two
actually,
ways about it.
I got to say, we have hired a lot of senior people. There's been friction because it's, well, this is the way you do it. And, especially the older guys, like, well, you're young and you don't know. And you're like, fuck, like, you don't, like, come on, you've got to get on board with what our principles are, be challenging in the right way. And it actually works out. And I think if you are high challenge, high support, like, you're going to have a lot of conflict to begin with sometimes and tension, but you will resolve it. And actually you become really close because of it. So it's funny because with the senior people, like I have been really impressed with the senior people, but also with the response of the firm to senior people, because we're hiring people who've got like big track records, big personalities, big characters. I hope they have, and I feel that they have come because of what we're doing. And I've had a lot of them on the podcast as well to say, yeah, look, I really believe in this mission. Transparency, democratizing markets is unusual. I love it. But undeniably they're going to come with their own issues, or not issues, but value systems. And they're going to see something and that's not how we did it at Goldman's or Vitol or Platts or whatever.
Yep.
And you're like, but this is Onyx, and you have to conform. You have to add, not like necessarily, well, conform is maybe the wrong word. You have to kind of like help us develop this from Onyx's DNA, not come in and just be a replica of something else. And that has been the instinct for a lot of senior people. And I've actually really been super impressed with the staff here on like big group chats and things like that. They don't like that. They said, that's not how we do things here. And I love the clarity there. They've really kind of shown me, at least, or at least from my observation, that they understand what we're all about, and they don't like people coming in here and disrupting that unless it's making the boat go faster. And so it's worked both ways. It's been really great to get like further along the curve on something, more expertise, push us further, raise our profile. But then there are downsides, but they don't feel like downsides because we're just calibrating. So they come in and challenge and say, but other people don't do that.
And there's always going to be that transitional bit, right? So if you think about a high performer that lives in a relentless environment that's filled with pressure, what you need more than anything else is control over how you prepare yourself and how you execute in that environment. What that leads to is quite a fixed set of principles of how I do things. It's safer, right? You need it in place. Yeah. Then if you go into a new environment where those principles perhaps don't align instantly, of course there's going to be a transitional phase where there's some to and fro around, oh, I'm not sure that makes sense. People are going to rigidly stick to what they know works because that's their safety net. Now, I think the responsibility here is to say, well, let's start a conversation about this, right? How can we, exactly to your point, align what we believe in and our values and how we do things here with what's worked for you previously? Now, we've got to work on the basis that you put the two together, we're in a better place than when we started, surely. But what you're speaking to there is everybody being on the same page. Whatever that new idea looks like, everyone's on the same page, which takes full circle back to that idea of joint purpose, sense of belonging, treating each other in the right way, being a decent team.
It does, but it feels full circle back to our principles as well, because when we say humility, we don't mean don't have confidence, don't be proud. I mean, you can have all those things, have ego, but it's the willingness to learn from others and to think you're not the finished article. I think people have been guilty of coming in here and thinking, well, I think this and I've been successful, so you guys need to do it as well. But fair play to them, they've seen enough evidence to know that like clearly we're not here out of luck, right? There's been a lot of strong iterations and we're charging forward. And I think we're a very unusual business. So we're not playing by the same rules. And I think there's a respect for that over time. That's really galvanized us. But I appreciate the chat, exactly as you just said, like 1 + 1 kind of equals 3 almost, because it's like you combine basically all these learnings in the past somewhere else with your learnings. And how can that not be a strong iteration? It's like testing a software.
It's a big field in my area at the moment around cognitive diversity. You get 50 people sat around the table who have the same idea. You leave that room with one idea.
Yeah.
You get 2 people who are on different pages. You leave that room with 2 ideas that we can start to play around with here. So that healthy conflict, that creative abrasion, whatever the hell you want to call it, really, really important. And I don't imagine, you might tell me otherwise, but I don't imagine you'd want to bring a senior hire into the organization who instantly bought in with everything that you were saying.
Agreed,
and nodded along. I don't think that would bring any value at all.
No, not at all. I think the big thing that senior people have done over the years, especially recently, is we want to professionalize and mature steadily, because ultimately, we've gone from 8 years ago to here. And a lot of that is there's a lot of youth in the company and inexperience, and you want to kind of solve that. And you can't just wave a magic wand. But I would say to a T, the ones we've kept around and been successful here, they have just added like a gravitas that you can't even really define almost. It's just happened. And then suddenly you have people say, this is like completely different to 6 months ago, but it just happened. And I really appreciate that almost like subconscious kind of, I guess that's the only challenge to what we're saying. Sometimes it's not so tangible. And it just, and
you and I have had this conversation already, as invariably we were always going to, because when someone like me that deals in a soft science comes into an environment like yours, which is so metric heavy, it's exactly the same as the stuff that we did in F1. What you're constantly searching for is, how do we track progress? How do we know if we're on the right track and we're seeing improvements? And someone like me frustrates someone like you by saying, well, I'll tell you what, let's have that conversation in 6 months' time, 8 months' time. We can work retrospectively to a degree. Like, what's the feel of the place?
Yeah, ultimately.
And what kind of feedback are you getting, and what kind of behaviours are you seeing? That's a really difficult thing to put figures on. Of course it is. But I still think it has value, right? I still think as somebody in a leadership position, you can look at your environment and say, right, does this feel or look different? Does the feedback sound different
Yeah.
to what it was like 12 months ago?
And from the trading perspective, again, just maybe there's grads listening and people applying to trading careers and the rest of it. What has your observations been about what makes a good trader?
The first thing I was taught, and I sit next to James Brodie out there who looks after the L&D here. And it's a sort of marriage of minds because I come from a sporting background with psychology experience, and he has decades worth of trading experience, and we sort of meet somewhere in the middle. And the one word that keeps coming up is discipline. It's the one word we keep scribbling down and underlining 2 or 3 times. The idea of grit, which is again defined as having a purpose, but also a real perseverance in you. The ability to, even when you're up against it, put one foot in front of foot in front of the other. But I think all of that relies, I think that comes secondary to the idea of just understand yourself. Like there is no perfect profile. I'm starting to understand that. But the perfect candidate comes in and can articulate how they respond to pressure and what their default settings are, and how sometimes they can be overly, for example, optimistic in their viewpoint, which may materialize into holding on into positions that they shouldn't. But then the next person through the door is wildly prudent. So they don't catch opportunities because they're far more concerned with something going wrong and losing money. The same principle applies to both, which is understand yourself and realize how you respond to pressure. And then things like discipline, things like demonstrating resilience or grit comes from that as a foundation, if that makes sense.
Like 100% makes sense, but I guess you do need to model it on some form of excellence. Ultimately, which I guess is the training program, is the desk heads. There's something to point to. This is what success looks like, but that's hugely variant as well. So I guess it's trying to pull out, and we all have different views. And if I had to say one thing we disagree on most at Onyx, it's what makes a good trader here. Because again, there's a temptation to say good with numbers. That's the generic thing, but everything you've just said there, it's like it's more about your attitude to basic decision making, attitude to what's it called again, critical thinking. Optimism or cynicism, these kind of things, and evaluating, doing your research, doing your reading. Maths is kind of like not up there too much, but of course you need to be comfortable with numbers. Let's not say it's irrelevant. And certainly that's part of the process with the tests, right? We need to make sure there's a level of competence with maths. But I guess it's just challenging, like again, for people wanting to be traders out there, trading is ultimately decision making. And you can't avoid numbers anywhere in life, but it's not, if you're very good at doing 42 times 73.9, you're going to be a good trader. It absolutely does not work like that. In fact, I've seen basically people trying to rely too hard on maths, and a spreadsheet and systems will always be better than you at that. So really what you need to focus on is, self-discipline, rules-based kind of heuristics and developing on that. So, but there's plenty more to get into. And I think ultimately what I think you'll find here is like, you are here for trading, but it will develop as a trading business, but we have so many different arms and we can't isolate, because ultimately we're trying to create one homogenous business that has a singular purpose, and everyone needs to be on board with that, despite the varying roles and skill sets and all that, which I think will be a challenge on the one hand, but I think it will be very, very interesting. And I think what I'm very keen to focus on is, and look, to be honest, we focus more on leadership this podcast than necessarily trader specifics, and those two will evolve. But I think, like you said, you have to see what it's like in 6 months. You can't necessarily define it.
But there are a couple of things that are entirely predictable here. So irrelevant of the environment that you're working in, let's take a trade floor versus an F1 paddock. At the end of the day, it's just people. The context is different in relation to what the demands of that particular task are, but it's just people, and we understand the wiring that unifies us all. And then we understand the individual differences that sit between any group of people. So coming and doing some work on this side of the building compared to the trade floor won't be wildly different. The other thing that you alluded to there is the leadership. Now, everything starts from the top. And I'll be completely honest with you, if I'd walked into the building and you and I not been on the same page with this stuff, it wouldn't have been the job for me, because every other person could have been on board. But if you weren't, then from an environmental perspective, we just wouldn't have got any leverage here. And that doesn't necessarily just relate to you and Omar. It relates to the next level of leadership, and then the next level 100%. Of leadership. That's where we start. And it won't come as any surprise to anybody listening that when someone like me walks into a building, the first people you speak to are the people at the at the top. You're the one that impact change around here. Everyone else just sort of feels it on a day-by-day basis. And the example I always use is you could do brilliant work with any employee. If you throw them into an environment that is relentless and unforgiving and they feel unsupported and they're unmotivated, it doesn't matter what the quality of that work looks like, they're going to fail.
Look, I think it's all fantastic stuff. I couldn't believe in it more. The trading side, I think actually it's a general life thing. And I think like sport might have adopted it, or the military and sport and business to some degree in trading, but it needs to make its way through the whole business because everything you're saying applies. And actually, if anything, it's part of the support thing. Like, why can't someone in research, for example, an analyst, be getting that same level of support? Because in my mind, it is performance. We need them to perform so we can start, building this business. It's everyone's got a hugely important role. And again, it's not, people call it wishy-washy. I don't care. We're ruthless about like what we want in this place and where we want to get to. And everyone needs to be pulling from the same hymn sheet, yes, but they also need to really believe in themselves. So I think we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but it does start with defining it. And I think it'd be nice for the internally then to hear that too, right? You are here for a bigger job, and obviously we have huge aspirations, and this will be a critical support system going forward.
Yeah, look, absolutely. You could take any role within this building. Most people from a confidence perspective walk in on day one and they make a very quick assessment that judges the demands of the task that they're being asked to do and the resources they have available to them, which is the skill. Our job is just to eke up that second bar, to get that gap as tight as possible. That's what confidence is.
Right.
If the demands that are being asked of them on a day-by-day basis are miles away from where they perceive themselves to be in terms of ability, in that gap lives anxiety and worry and frustration. That's why you lose people.
Yeah.
That's why people think I can't do this job. Even if that gap is wide, and this is high challenge, high support, even if that gap is wide, but they feel like I'm working with a group of people who are hell-bent on getting my bar higher, we won't go too far wrong.
That's great. Chris, thanks a lot for your time. And listeners out there, I hope you found that very interesting, because I know I did. And there's so much more to get on, and I'm sure we'll have you on again. And there's maybe 6 months to do that kind of review of how things have gone. Again, thanks for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. It really, really helps. And I hope you're enjoying a lot of the variance in content we have these days. See you again soon for more.